Welcome and thank you for taking the time to enjoy this discussion on two measures of English language proficiency, the Oregon English Language Proficiency Assessment, better known as the ELPA, and the Woodcock-Munoz Language Survey Revised Normative Update, which we'll refer to as the Woodcock-Munoz in this presentation. The measures presented here are among a variety that focus on English language proficiency. We use these tools with students that usually have a primary home language other than English, usually because there are situations with Native Americans, Native Alaskans, or some other qualifiers that will cause a student to be considered an English language learner and be a participant in one or both of the measures we're using today. The English language proficiency can be separated into productive and receptive categories. Using language to communicate meaning is known as production. We actively generate or produce language through writing and speaking. The term receptive is used for the processes of understanding or comprehending language, accomplished through the act of receiving content by reading or listening. Some practitioners in the field will refer to a fifth language mode or element, culture. The consideration here is for determining whether test items may be culturally inclusive or exclusive. The ELPA does address differential item functioning, DIF, as part of the field testing process for test items. This is important to determine if an item potentially has a cultural or other type of bias. Constraints here. The first, they're widely used. Language proficiency measurement tools that have the widest use, at least the K-12 educational structure, meaning that use of this was mandatory in the case of the ELPA, as in the case of the Woodcock-Munoz, it's widely used. Second, they're state approved. Both measures are approved for use by the state. In fact, the ELPA is the state tool for measuring English proficiency of the ELL population. Third, English language proficiency. Both measures address English proficiency and can be used for evaluating students' annual growth. They aren't used to drive instruction as much as they inform summative data collection, which will support program placement options for students and program evaluation processes. Fourth, K-12 application. Both measures are used across public schools from kindergarten through comparing the measures. ELPA is the state of Oregon's annual assessment of English language proficiency administered to qualifying students, English language learners. Directly from the ODU website, the ELPA will be the primary state measure for determining ELL students' English language proficiency. Students who achieve a level of advanced on ELPA are generally considered to be proficient. The ELPA produces 7 distinct scores, a composite score, and 6 subscores: reading, writing, listening, speaking, grammatical, and elocutionary. Grammatical is verb tense, subject-noun agreement, direct and indirect object usage, and objects of prepositions are measured. Elocutionary, the amount and context of a response. Basically, does the student address the prompt and how well? Woodcock-Munoz is one of the tools used by school districts or agencies to determine whether or not a student qualifies for EL services. Directly from the administration manual, it provides a broad sampling of proficiency in oral language, language comprehension, reading, and writing. As opposed to the ELPA, the Woodcock-Munoz is individually administered one-to-one and can be administered any time during the year. Woodcock-Munoz has 7 subtests: picture vocabulary, verbal analogies, letter-word identification, dictation, understanding, directions, story recall, and passage comprehension. The first 4 are used for purposes of screening incoming students for ELL services. The construct, population, and purpose defined. The first column, construct definition. The ELPA reports on English language proficiency in reading, writing, listening, speaking, and comprehension. The Woodcock-Munoz, cognitive academic language proficiency, better known as CALP. CALP often has a partner, BICS, B-I-C-S, which basically represents the social language proficiency a student acquires. The population definition, second column. The ELPA, the target population is school-age children in Oregon. This isn't an optional assessment for anyone. A student must be flagged in the system, the OAKS system, to be administered the test. The flag originates with the student's district. Woodcock-Munoz, practically this test is used from kinder screening and placement to screening and placement for all incoming students that indicate language screening is appropriate. The purpose definition for the ELPA to assess academic ability in reading, writing, listening, speaking, and comprehension for English language learners enrolled in Oregon Public Schools grades K-12. The purpose definition for the Woodcock-Munoz: provide a theoretically and technically sound procedure for evaluating English and/or Spanish language proficiency. The Woodcock-Munoz measures cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP. There are 6 proficiency levels. We'll look at these closer when we get to scoring and scales. The description of measures here. The number of subtests: the ELPA has 2, the Woodcock-Munoz 7. The types of subtests for the ELPA: it's reading, writing, and listening, and speaking would be the second test. The 7 subtests for the Woodcock-Munoz represent visual and oral prompts. The number of alternative forms: the ELPA is adaptive, so it has none. And the Woodcock-Munoz does have a Form A and a Form B, but typically Form A is the driving resource for screening students. The Form B would be an add-on tool that is used when the purpose for is pre and post testing. Administration time: the ELPA has no limits. It's suggested 60 to 75 minutes might be appropriate, but students can have as long as they want. The Woodcock-Munoz, it's a one-to-one screening as noted there, but it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for those first 4 subtests. All 7 subtests take about 45 minutes total. The administration method for the ELPA is computer with a headset and microphone. One-to-one for the Woodcock-Munoz. Accommodations, as allowed by the Test Administration Manual published by the State of Oregon for the ELPA. They're typically test environment, setting, printing passages, shorter time, small group, things like that. For the Woodcock-Munoz, accommodations might include the setting for younger children, a parent or a trusted person with them, time, and print size. The description of items and their scoring: the ELPA consists of multiple choice, imitated response, short, extended written and spoken response items. The Woodcock-Munoz consists of oral or identified response to visual oral prompts and a written response to an oral prompt. Looking at scoring in scales, the ELPA summarizes student performance in scaled scores. The number of items answered correctly, along with their difficulty level, are used to transform theta scores into scaled scores. A theta score is a Roche ability estimate where theta represents any student ability level on the operational form. Scaled scores are mapped into 5 performance levels using 4 performance standards or cut scores. An example of a cut score is between, let's say, beginning and early intermediate. That would be one cut score. The Woodcock-Munoz uses or reports norm curve equivalence, standard scores, or percentile rank, age equivalent, grade equivalent, W score, and RPI. I'll explain the RPI, which is bolded here, a little more. The transformation of a Roche scale is called a W score, which a specific measure to the Woodcock-Munoz. The Roche-derived W scale is an equal interval suitable for growth comparisons. The relative proximity index is based on the distance along the W scale. The RPI uses a constant denominator 90 to indicate the test subject performing a task with 90% proficiency, where a sample of average individuals in the subject's comparison group would show 90% proficiency. And the norming sample we're going to look at in a little more detail on the next slide, so we can get a good idea of the demographics and how the numbers came out according to grade bands. Moving down to the criterion description column here, the ELPA has 5 performance level descriptors. And they define what students must do to demonstrate progress as measured by the ELPA. The levels were developed from the English Language Proficiency standards adopted by the state of Oregon. And the WMLS-R, or Woodcock-Munoz, has 4 levels of interpretive information available: qualitative, level of development, proficiency, and relative standing in a group. We've got qualitative and proficiency here in the slide just to emphasize the criterion descriptions from those 4. And for our purposes, proficiency is the criterion referenced information we're interested in, used for making decisions based on a student's level of proficiency. Now, looking back at the norming information for the ELPA and Woodcock-Munoz, looking at the ELPA, we have the grade bands for the test, the participant grade bands, that first column. And then I selected one of those grade bands to look a little more detailed at the demographic data. Things to note here are the 75% for Hispanic participants and the 73% for economically disadvantaged participants across that range of categories there, and also the difference between female and male participants. Looking at the Woodcock-Munoz, the sample populations from that total are sorted into the preschool, K-12, college, university, and adult non-school. I apologize for the college university slide. That should be a comma. The K-12 sample is what we typically are looking at. They're both predictive for the ELPA and the Woodcock-Munoz. And the ELPA uses a committee process to determine validity of rubrics and range finding. The Woodcock-Munoz uses proficiency ranges to classify scores. And construct, convergent and or divergent, the ELPA reports on each of these domains, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and determines validity by calibrating items with the previously described RASH methodology. The Woodcock-Munoz, these descriptors, reading, writing, listening, and oral language, are cluster scores, as mentioned earlier, a concept emphasized by the Woodcock-Munoz language survey. Diagnostic efficiency, that last row down there, it's not recommended for the ELPA, and interpretations will vary for the Woodcock-Munoz. Some interpretations might be for determining English language proficiency, oral language dominance, monitoring growth, eligibility for bilingual ESL services. Those are some. Here's that one slide we just slipped into a little while ago. Worth noting here, looking at the total test for the ELPA, the coefficients, that center column right there, in the 0.99 plus range for all the grade bands there. Another piece of technical adequacy here. Correlations were established between the Woodcock-Munoz and other assessments in 3 special samples: preschool, school age, and university. For this measure comparison, we'll look at details from the school age study. Test subjects in the school age study were administered 5 Woodcock-Munoz Language Survey Revised subtests and the WISC-3, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 3rd edition. The main point to observe here is the higher correlations from the Woodcock-Munoz Language Survey Revised and the WISC-3 clusters, verbal IQ and verbal comprehension index, the pink ones. This provides evidence that the Woodcock-Munoz measures the construct of CALP, Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency. Now, looking at the pros and cons, several elements of the ELPA are likely to fall into both positive and negative categories. From a practitioner's point of view, the ELPA is a draw on time. Students can take a long time and we lose instruction. It can have negative implications, meaning performance targets are not based on evidence in student performance, and results can have limited uses. We can't use them to evaluate instructional practices. We're just reporting our accountability. The Woodcock-Munoz, some notable positives are the applications for screening students for ELL or bilingual services. Liked and disliked, From a student perspective, the interactive participation of the ELPA is much more interesting. A variety of item complexity and difficulty does a better job of engaging students. As it is, it provides accountability to the state more than anything else, which is important. The Woodcock-Munoz, having conducted several hundreds over the years, it is a good screening tool. For some of the other suggested uses, I know we're usually better served by multiple measures informing a decision, whether the stakes are high or low. What either the ELPA or the Woodcock-Munoz will do well, both tools can provide longitudinal data on students. Over a period of several years, we can evaluate student progress and relative rates of growth, or not growth in some cases. Website references. If you've never visited the Oregon Department of Education website, you owe yourself the opportunity. It's a wealth of information there, and anything ELPA should be available. Riverside Publishing is the parent company for the Woodcock-Munoz Language Survey Revised Normative Update. There is technical information there as well, which is very easy to access. The references here are those used to produce this report. And I also used my own ELL plan from my school district we just recently. And thank you. Gracias por su tiempo.